Let's get into it. Give me 1 minute to explain what's going on. Soul Not For Sale podcast. Coach Colin here. We got Joe Rogan and Mike Baker, the ex-CIA agent. I say that because once you join, I don't think you ever really get to leave. It's like the mob. They just keep pulling you back in when they need you. Joe Rogan is asking the question that a lot of people are afraid to ask, and that's about Israel and Palestine. And how did they miss October 7th? How did they not know this was going to happen? How did they not stop it before it could happen? Because it was an atrocity. It was terrible. So many people perished. You know, like they have the IDF, they have the Mossad. How did those two forces that are supposed to just be watching Israel and keeping Israel under close watch and protecting Israel at all costs, how did they let this get past? What happened? A lot of people don't want to ask that question, but Joe Rogan is. And I'm going to play that clip for you right now. Let's get into it.
From an intelligence perspective, how did that October 7th thing not get detected? I mean, doesn't the IDF, don't they have agents embedded in Hamas? Don't they have like the most intense security system ever and surveillance system ever?
They do, yeah. And it was a massive intelligence failure. And in part, it was a very, I don't want to say sophisticated. Sophisticated is the wrong word. But in terms of the planning of this, if you're conducting an operation or you're conducting any intelligence really concern, then the first thing you need to worry about is need to know. Right. So how do you limit information? How do you limit the dissemination of information about what you're doing? And that's just good OPSEC. That's good operational security. Now, that's what they did. They displayed extremely sophisticated, I suppose, operational security over this. Because you're right, there's human sources that the IDF and Shin Bet and others in Israel have within Gaza. There's the communications intercepts, signals intelligence. There's just general surveillance that they're doing of the region in terms of movement of goods. But most of that movement of goods happens on the ground. And 300 miles of tunnels in Gaza that they've built, using money, by the way, using money that was probably meant for clean water works and other infrastructure and improving schools and hospitals. That's a whole different angle to talk about. But yeah, I think the security side of things, by doing that, by limiting who knows about the operation, and because again, you could legitimately argue the political leadership of Hamas, they had a sense, I'm sure at some point they approved a large-scale operation, but the people who really knew about this were the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which is an organization with the Iranian regime, and they're kind of the liaison partners for Hamas and Hezbollah. They manage a lot of the training issues. They funnel a lot of the money that goes to these organizations that are Iranian proxies. And so you can count on the fact that a limited number within the IRGC were aware of the planning and the training because they did train Hamas operatives in Iran prior to 7 October. So I think, yeah, it was simply a matter of them saying, all right, this cell will have knowledge of this during the course of training. These guys over here will know this. These people will know this. And maybe a handful of people will understand the full picture and will understand when we're going to do this. And it's all designed to keep it away from Israeli intelligence. And it was ridiculously successful in that regard. So, and also you could argue intelligence is a human operation, or an endeavor. So you're going to have failures on occasion. You just don't want them to be this massive. There were occasional comments about the inclination of Hamas to do something bigger. No details, no specific details. And Hamas also spent a great deal of time leading up to this, years, convincing the Israeli government through their words, through their actions or lack of actions, that it was a new day and that what they're looking to do is create a different dynamic or relationship with the Israeli government. And so the Israeli government became complacent. And when they became complacent to some degree over Hamas and the fact that there hadn't been any strikes, there hadn't been any terrorist actions for a period of time, then what you saw was then they kind of turned inward. And people talk about the political divisions within Israel and the fact that the government was in a bit of disarray and it was a little dysfunctional, a lot of arguments going on. That in part was because, they had not the luxury, but but the ability to kind of turn in on themselves because they didn't feel necessarily that threat outside was as bad as it had been, right? And that they thought perhaps it's diminishing, perhaps Hamas is changing its tune, and that was a deliberate attempt by Hamas to lull them into that state, right? And so there were a lot of things going on at the same time, but yeah, there's no way around it. It's a massive intelligence failure.
The most cynical and conspiratorial take on it is that they let it happen because this is the best way to destroy Hamas. That they knew it was going to happen, so they allowed it to take place.
Yeah, that's pretty cynical. Yeah, I mean, if you can get your head around that idea that they said, yeah, we're going to let Hamas or somehow encourage Hamas to come in and slaughter all these women, babies, children, men, I suppose that's, if someone can get there, then God bless them. That's their right. But I'm not buying it. I've seen intelligence failures before. I know it can happen. No matter how many cameras you've got up, no matter how good your signals intelligence intercepts are, they dumb that down, right? I'm not calling anybody on the phone because I know you're going to pick that up, right? I'm not going to talk about this anywhere.
Right.
I want to hand a note to my cousin, who runs a part of a battalion in Hamas. They got 24 battalions. So, but I'm going to keep that communication as stupid as I can. That's what Al Qaeda did, right? And they dumbed it down, and it becomes much more difficult. They limit the number of sources who know about it. That limits your target pool of assets who can tell you something from a human perspective. And, but again, people go, I've seen some pretty wacky conspiracy theories come out of this since 7 October, right? And, I'm not buying that one.
Yeah, the most conspiratorial was that Netanyahu was kind of on the way out with the people, and that this is the way for him to sort of galvanize everybody and get support and maintain power and then do what he actually wanted to do, go in there and attack Hamas.
Yeah. Well, it's one theory.
Yeah.
But
whenever you have something this chaotic, you're always going to have a bunch of wacky theories.
Yeah. And I get that. Because you have a lot of people who still refuse to believe that Hamas doesn't give a shit about Palestinians. And again, I keep going back to the same thing, which is, well, take a look at Gaza, and tell me what Hamas has done for the people of Gaza. Because again, Palestinian people aren't lined up 100% behind them. In fact, there's been reports of looting of Hamas facilities since they've been losing their grip on power. The Hamas leadership structure is enormously wealthy. Right? They've stolen billions of dollars that was theoretically intended for Palestinian improvements.
Can you explain that? Like, how did they get a hold of the money, and how is the money out?
I let that clip run a little bit long. It's very interesting. I was writing something down. I was writing how just now he said, Joe brought up that theory, right? And some other people, Charlie Kirk being one person, he brought up that same theory because he had experience in Israel. He's very pro-Israel. He goes there frequently, has a lot of friends in the IDF. So he was bringing up that same theory just because he knew the size of Israel, and he knew that it was about the size of New Jersey, and he'd been through the whole place in a helicopter. It took 45 minutes, and somehow it took 6 hours for them to neutralize what was going on. So Charlie Kirk was asking those questions. But the thing that I noticed that Mike Baker did is, as he was confronted with that theory, he started connecting it to, some people still can't wrap their head around the fact that Hamas doesn't care about Palestinians. It just, I don't think he's insinuating anything there, but it's just odd that he's taking it to that place and then kind of run along sentences over to the money and what they're stealing and this and that. He doesn't fully address it. He kind of addresses it as he's speaking, but once he gets there, he kind of trails off and kind of makes it about something else, starts talking about money and whatnot. But, that doesn't have anything to do with what Joe was asking about. And kudos to Joe. Like, a lot of people want to say controlled opposition that and handled this, and some people even suggest that Mike Baker is Joe's handler, which I think is absolutely wild, because Mike Baker seems like, no offense, it seems like he can't even handle himself at times. But that could be an act. I don't know. But kudos to him for actually asking that question, actually going there and being like, hey, what about this? Because a lot of people don't want to go there. There's a feeling of, if you ask that question, that you're no longer of support. You're not supporting Israel anymore. You're almost, in this vein of supporting Hamas in a sense, or espousing some kind of conspiracy. But it's just a question. You know, asking a question isn't the same as a conspiracy theory. You know, and a lot of people say a conspiracy theory is just, you know, a spoiler alert kind of thing. But kudos to him for asking that question. But yeah, Mike Baker connecting it to that. Like, oh, some people can't wrap their, like, he was basically saying that the only reason someone would have that type of question or theorize that is because they can't wrap their head around Hamas not caring for Palestinians. You're telling me that people, middle class, lower class people in America, American citizens, can't wrap their head around elected officials not caring about the people who elected them. Okay. Sure. You're telling me people in Canada can't wrap their head around someone who's elected not caring about them. Sure. You're telling me someone in Australia can't wrap their head around someone being elected and then not caring about the citizens. Okay, sure there, Mike. But I mean, aside from that, he does kind of he makes some good points just about the massive intelligence failure, because it does happen. The one thing he said, it is a human thing. You know, it's not like we're not at the point where AI is running this show. It is people, and people can be compromised. It's possible that there's some compromised Israelis. It's possible that some people who they thought were embedded in Hamas that were on the Israeli side were actually switched and were kind of doing a double cross type of thing. You know, like that to me seems like the most likely thing. If you think you have someone who's embedded in Hamas and then in reality, they're just giving you false information, that seems like that happens quite a bit in that world of spies and espionage and all that stuff. That would make sense to me. But here's another thing. He was kind of making things up. When he was talking about dumbing it down and passing notes, I'm not an ex-CIA guy. I've heard none of that from anybody. He was kind of just making that up. He goes, oh, you know, they dumb it down. You know, I'm going to give a note to my cousin, this and that. He's kind of just making that up as he was going along, and then kind of connected it to that's what Al-Qaeda did, which I did not know. It does make sense. Does make sense. You know what I mean? Like I've known some people who will be like, you know, in my past, lifetimes away from now, they'll be like, I'm coming over. And then they'd be like, and I'm leaving my phone in the car and I want to go and talk to this person. And, you know, I'm leaving this, all my electronics are getting left here and I'm going to talk over there. And we're going to walk for 20 minutes and then I'm going to talk to you. I've seen people, I know people that have done that, right? So I understand that, but that's not based in fact. He just kind of made that up. So, and then at the beginning of that question, he was avoiding. I had that written down right away. Just avoiding. He was avoiding answering that. Really wasn't looking Joe in the eye much, which, you know, that's here nor there, whatever. I'm not one of those people that's like, I'm a body language expert. I'm not into that type of thing. But I did notice he wasn't looking Joe in his eye. But here's the thing that really stood out to me, is that they were lulled into such a state of security that they started turning in on themselves. And come on. I mean, you know about that. You know that's a real thing. Sometimes a place gets so strong and they're so sure of their position of where they are that they just start bickering from the inside. Bickering about this gender, that thing, this washroom, that color, that religion, this, that. Like, they just start bickering on the inside. And that's another thing that Charlie Kirk brought up. He said that Israel was in a place where, and, you know, I haven't heard this from anyone that I know there, but he was saying that they were neighboring civil war. Now, to just say that, I don't know. You know, people say that all the time. I think I've heard that from Canada. I've heard that America. I've heard that in Australia. And now I'm hearing it in Israel. I think there's always, as there's this two-party system kind of thing, people always feel those kind of tensions, especially when they're wrapped up in the political stuff. They feel like, wow, this can become civil war. But I don't know if that's really true. But a nation turning in on themselves because they have no real problems, right? And that's so true, because Israel is proud people, very proud people, very much unified people. But it was always because everybody around them hates them. So it was like, we have to unify. So forget about your differences. Forget that you're Ashkenazi and I'm Sephardic. Forget about you got tattoos and I like forget that you're Orthodox and I'm secular. Forget all that. All of us together. We're all brothers. Because those people outside are the issue. If all of a sudden that issue starts to die down all around you, you start to look at each other and all of a sudden your differences are the things you start bickering about. We're seeing that in real time. I mean, America is in such a good place that people who are Palestinian supporters, instead of going to Palestine, they attack the White House. Like, that says it all right there. People are bickering about the most wild things here. Like, it's just, I don't know. I 100% understand that. When he says that, that makes sense to me. That and, possible double crossing makes sense in terms of what happened. But all in all, the one thing that he said that was beyond true is that it was a massive intelligence failure. Massive. Such a big intelligence failure. Pretty much inexcusable. If I was running the show, I would probably be restaffing everybody. Pretty much. Anybody who I thought was embedded in Hamas, I would have to see them. And I would have to see them. Anybody who I thought was the head of Mossad, I would have to restructure. There'd just be restructuring all around if I was running the show, because that doesn't make any sense to let something like that happen. Especially in a place where it's like, this is the number one thing you have to be watching over is all the people all around that hate us. That's the one thing we need you to watch over more than anything else, which leads me to believe that there was so much infighting, because if there was so much infighting, all those organizations would be focused on, the left and the right. And one thing that Charlie Kirk did say, he said that he had a friend in the IDF, high up friend. He was saying, Charlie, the same problem that you have with the left in America, we have here in Israel. And when Charlie Kirk said that, I was like, that's very understood. Like, think about that, think about at times, not all the time, but what people who are radical, let's not even just say that they're the left. They're not regular left. They're not classical liberals. They're not the common sense people. They're the people without common sense. How far are they willing to go? And if they have that going on in their country, well, then that's another thing that makes sense to me. So all in all, I'm just happy that Joe Rogan was able to ask that question. I kind of wish he asked it to Tim Kennedy more than Mike Baker. But again, it's like, maybe he's asking this question to Mike Baker because, what I keep saying is true. And that when you leave the CIA, you're never really out of the CIA. You know what I mean? It's like the mob. They pull you back in when they need you. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think about this whole thing, this massive intelligence failure. What do you think? And if you're in the camp of Joe Rogan is controlled, when he asks a question like that, do you still see him that way? I would love to know that, because I never go deep into the people who think this about Joe. I understand it, but I never go deeper into why they understand it the way they do. So I would love to know, do you still see Joe as that, even though he's asked that question? Because that's a question no one's willing to ask. No one's willing to bring that up. It's been Charlie Kirk and Joe Rogan. Tucker Carlson slightly brought it up. He didn't actually bring it up. He didn't question it, but he just kind of touched on it a little bit. But he didn't actually bring it up. So you still see him as controlled opposition? Let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking about this whole clip, this whole Mike Baker person. Anyways, like, subscribe. I'm out.